Jack Moreland wasn't one to get rattled. After all, he'd been a space scavenger long enough to navigate asteroid fields and hostile planets with only a quarter tank of fuel and a barely functioning translator. But this was different. He stood in front of an altar that looked like a cross between a bad acid trip and an industrial-sized vending machine. Not what I was expecting, he muttered, tapping his foot against the floor. Definitely not in the brochure. The alien writing on the walls was cryptic, and by the looks of the faded carvings, it hadn't been touched in centuries. Still, Jack was certain it was just some forgotten treasure hoard. Ancient technology's gotta be worth something, right? He gave the altar a couple of experimental tugs, hoping to activate something that'd make him richer. Maybe a few gadgets, maybe some old coinage. A couple of things to sell when he got back to the station. Nothing. Okay, come on, Jack groaned. I've dealt with weirder ruins. Let's get this show on the road. That's when the light show started. A low hum, followed by glowing symbols on the altar that blinked to life like a neon sign in a forgotten alley. Jack's heart rate spiked as he took a step back, realizing maybe he'd messed with something he shouldn't have. Before he could consider running, the ground shook, sending a wave of dust and loose rocks across the room. The air grew thick, like humidity in a tropical jungle, and a pulsating energy filled the room. A voice, low and resonant, boomed out of nowhere, the words incomprehensible. And then, the aliens appeared. The Zendarii, as Jack later learned they were called, stood tall and sleek, their bodies covered in shimmering scales that seemed to shift colors with every movement. Their faces, elongated and stoic, gave off an unsettling air of authority, as if they had seen everything the universe had to offer and found it amusing. One of them stepped forward, the leader by the looks of the ceremonial garb. He spoke in a melodic, alien tongue, his voice reverberating in Jack's skull. Jack, thinking he could get out of this mess with a little humor, slapped his translator device into action. The device sputtered, crackled, and then lazily spit out, "You have desecrated our sacred spaces. You will now be cleansed by the flames of your loins." Jack blinked. "My, what now?" he mumbled, thinking he heard wrong. "Flames of my loins? That's not something I signed up for." The Zendarii continued their chants, and though Jack couldn't understand them, he got the sense they weren't exactly pleased. Then the leader spoke again, this time his tone laced with something almost expectant. "Prepare yourself, vessel of the unseen," the voice rang out. "You must surrender your body and soul to the ritual." Jack froze. Hold up. Surrender my what now?" he asked, his pulse quickening. "Look, I don't know what kind of kink ritual this is, but I'm not really." The shaman's eyes glowed with an eerie light, and suddenly Jack found himself surrounded by an array of glowing symbols. They appeared to swirl around him like some kind of force field. "Body and soul, human," the leader repeated, his voice an unsettling calm. "You must submit. It is the way of our people." Jack gulped, his mind scrambling to make sense of the situation. The last thing he wanted was to get caught up in some weird alien ritual. His escape plan was already working out fine, until it wasn't. Now he was here, in the middle of what he could only assume was an intergalactic freak show, and the universe was asking him to submit to something. He rubbed the back of his neck and tried to reason. Okay, maybe I'm missing something. Let's start over. I'm not exactly in the mood for whatever kind of cleansing this is. There's a lot I'd prefer to do with my body, and none of it involves being in a glowing alien sauna. The Zendarii were quiet for a moment, considering him. Then the leader's face cracked into a smile, if you could even call it that, more like the expression a cat makes when it's about to pounce on a mouse. "This is not what you think it is, human," the leader said. "You are not being punished. You are being prepared. Cleansed of your impurities so you can unite with the worlds. You will enter the union." "Union of what?" Jack asked, not entirely convinced he wanted to know. The shaman waved his hand, and a hologram appeared in front of Jack, depicting a swirling mass of lights and shapes. "The union of worlds," he explained. "The deepest connection between the realms of flesh and spirit. You will experience it all. The joining of minds, the intertwining of bodies. It is the path to ultimate enlightenment. Jack stared at the hologram in disbelief. You've got to be kidding me. The leader, unfazed by Jack's confusion, continued. We ask for your consent. You must join with us, human. Allow us to purify you. Allow the union to take place. Jack's mind was racing. Purification, union, this sounded less like a sacred ritual and more like a miscommunication that could end in disaster. He glanced at the shaman's translator device, hoping for some clarity. The translator's voice came back. Prepare to polish your core essence. The time for cleansing is now. Jack's stomach churned. Polish my core essence, he muttered to himself. Okay, I can't be hearing this right. He cleared his throat, thinking fast. Listen, pal, I don't know what kind of ritual you're running here, but I'm not signing up for anything that involves polishing or anything near my core essence. The Zendarii leader nodded knowingly, though Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the alien was enjoying this. It is an earthly misunderstanding, human. We seek your connection. To cleanse you, body and soul. It is not what you fear. Right, Jack said dryly. And here I thought my greatest challenge today was finding spare parts. I didn't expect to be enlisted for the cosmic cleansing ceremony of the century. But even as he spoke, Jack felt the pull of their words, the odd pressure building around him. He was in too deep now, and somehow, the Zendarii had made him the center of a strange cosmic joke. The question remained, could he get out of this mess without embarrassing himself, and could he still salvage his dignity? He wasn't sure, but at this point, he was certain of one thing, this wasn't going to be the kind of ritual he'd ever forget. And it was only just beginning. Jack's mind was a jumbled mess as he tried to process the sheer absurdity of what was happening. Union of Worlds sounded like something out of a badly written space opera. This wasn't just some spiritual experience, it was a full-on, hands-on ordeal, apparently. He wasn't sure if he was supposed to get naked, chant in some alien tongue, or start rubbing weird alien artifacts. All right, Jack muttered to himself. Let's figure this out. His mind raced, but nothing he thought of made sense in the face of what the Zendarii were insisting he do. One of the shamans stepped forward, their glowing eyes trained on him with an intensity that was almost unsettling. The way they looked at him made Jack feel like a lab specimen. Their leader raised a thin, shimmering staff, muttering something that Jack's translator device couldn't quite pick up. Could you run that through again? Translator's a bit off, Jack said, shaking the device in his hand like it would fix itself if he shook it enough. The translator chirped to life. It is time for you to, how do you say, unify yourself with the Zendarii essence. You must let go of your primitive human insecurities. Jack squinted. What do you mean, primitive human insecurities? Look, I'm not insecure, okay? He was cut off as the ground beneath him shifted. His boots started to stick to the floor, a slick substance slowly using up around his ankles. He tried to shake his foot free, but it was no use. Unification is not without discomfort, human, the shaman continued, his voice practically oozing with patience. It is the process of cleansing your form. Accept it. The slime, or whatever it was, slowly spread, coating his legs like an unwanted hug. Jack couldn't help but laugh nervously. Cleansing? More like, spiritual swamp, he muttered, trying not to panic. The weird, sticky substance was starting to crawl up to his knees, and with every inch it climbed, he felt the weight of his situation getting heavier. Look, Jack said, finally accepting that resistance wasn't doing him any good, I'm all for cleansing, but this is getting a little messy. He waved his arms as the slime reached his thighs, completely immobilizing him. Can we please skip the sticky part and get to the enlightening part? One of the Zendarii seemed to find this amusing, his deep voice echoing. You misunderstand, human. The slime is not only a ritualistic cleanser. It is also a bonding agent. His eyes glinted as he stepped closer. It helps merge your physical being with ours. Prepare yourself. Bonding agent, huh? I've heard of worse, Jack said under his breath, trying to keep his voice steady. Look, if this is some kind of alien love potion, I just gotta say, not my thing, okay? I don't do slime. No offense. But the shaman wasn't listening. He gestured with his hands, and the slime began to swirl around Jack's body, creeping up his chest. It was warm now, almost sensual in its oddness, and Jack could feel his pulse quicken. His first instinct was to kick and struggle, but it only made things worse. The more he moved, the more the slime enveloped him, until it covered him entirely from the waist down. He was completely immobilized. Great. I'm a human burrito, Jack muttered, staring at the ceiling. His heart was racing, and not because of the strange feeling in his legs. Maybe I should have just kept the ship in one piece and left the ancient rituals to someone else. The shamans were still chanting, their voices now blending together in a harmonic resonance that sent vibrations through his body. It felt like they were trying to reach him, to touch him, more than just physically. It was almost like they were prying into his brain, peeling away layers of thought and exposing the things he'd buried. The deep insecurities. The bits of guilt he'd never dealt with. The loneliness that he'd tried so hard to hide from the rest of the galaxy. But instead of feeling ashamed, Jack found himself laughing. Not at them, but at the ridiculousness of it all. He was trapped in an alien temple, covered in alien slime, having an alien spiritual experience, and all he could do was laugh. You know, he said, still chuckling, this has got to be the weirdest vacation I've ever had. Last time I went on a trip, I got a souvenir. This time, I got stuck with a cosmic wet blanket. The Zendarii leader, who had been silent up until now, smiled slightly. You are unique, human. Your humor is an unexpected response. Well, what can I say? I'm a complex guy, Jack quipped, even as he began to feel an odd sense of warmth spreading through his body. It wasn't sexual, not at all, but it felt like something was shifting, like he was letting go of something. Are you ready to experience the union? The shaman asked, his voice somehow softer now, as if trying to gauge Jack's readiness. Jack blinked, trying to make sense of the words. Union of what, exactly? The bonding is slime's really doing a lot of heavy lifting, but I'm still not sure where this is going. Another one of the Zendarii nodded in agreement. You are funny. But you still don't understand. You're telling me, Jack muttered under his breath. The shaman continued. The union is not about your body. It is about your soul. Your mind, your thoughts, your essence. When the slime has coated you completely, you will experience the true connection between your species and ours. Ah. So it's soul yoga with slime, Jack said, cracking a smile. That's a nice way to put it. All right, I'm game. But you gotta promise me one thing. What is that? The shaman asked, tilting his head. No more slime, Jack said, voice deadpan. Just give me some time to unite with my own body before we do the cosmic mind meld thing, all right? The shaman's grin widened, clearly amused by Jack's irreverence. If that is what you wish, human. We will proceed with the cleansing in a manner that suits your expectations. Jack let out a long breath. If he was going to get through this with any shred of his dignity intact, it was going to be with sarcasm and a lot of awkward humor. And if it involved more slime, well, he'd deal with that too. There was no turning back now. Still, as he tried to steady his breath and let go of the weird tension in his body, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The sensation of the slime creeping up his body was undeniably uncomfortable, but Jack wasn't ready to give up just yet. He'd survived worse. He had to admit, though, that this felt like something completely new. The weird go wasn't just constricting him physically, it felt like it was crawling inside his mind, twisting around his thoughts. As the Zendarii shamans continued their chant, Jack couldn't help but feel that his sense of reality was becoming more malleable. It's like being inside a living marshmallow, he muttered to himself, trying to keep a light-hearted attitude despite the mounting pressure. A very sticky, mind-bending marshmallow. His voice echoed in the chamber, but the Zendarii didn't respond, their focus on him unwavering. Jack struggled again, but all that did was make the slime shift and solidify, creating an unyielding cocoon around his body. The glowing symbols on the altar flickered in time with the hum in the air. Whatever this ritual was, it was too late to back out now. Okay, we're doing this, Jack said with a nervous chuckle, trying to ease the tension. Slime. Soul unity. Great. Just don't make me sing or something. The shaman who had been closest to him nodded slowly, as though Jack's attempt at humor was appreciated, though clearly they didn't understand why it was funny. Your spirit has begun to open, human, the leader said. We can feel the barriers between our worlds beginning to break down. Jack raised an eyebrow. Feel the barriers breaking down? Okay, I didn't sign up for psychic nudity, alright? He was half joking, but at the same time, he wasn't sure if he was being read right now. The vibe in the room was too surreal, the air charged with strange energy. He was starting to get the distinct feeling that the Zendarii were way more advanced than he'd anticipated, and that maybe, just maybe, he was way out of his depth. Are we done yet? Jack asked, trying to make light of the situation. He wasn't even sure what he meant by done. Was this a cleansing, or some bizarre alien social experiment? The leader tilted his head, and the shimmering light in his eyes seemed to brighten. We are only beginning. The union requires more than a physical bond. You must embrace the fullness of your soul. Jack's face fell. Fullness of my soul? Yeah, that's not the answer I was hoping for. Let's be real. Can I skip this part? You may not skip, came the reply. It is the process of becoming. Jack rolled his eyes, starting to feel like he was stuck in an alien motivational seminar. Right. Becoming something. Great. Can we speed up the process? My brain's about to explode here. Despite his mounting unease, he couldn't help but notice the odd sensation beginning to spread. It wasn't the discomfort he'd expected, there was no more pressure, no more suffocating restriction. In fact, the slime had begun to change, softening into something akin to a warm embrace, almost comforting in its absurdity. It didn't make sense, but the strange heat seemed to make him calmer. He stopped thrashing, letting the feeling envelop him. Something about it was drawing him in. Okay, fine. I'll admit it, Jack sighed, half to himself. This is weirder than anything I've done on a Saturday night. A soft chuckle came from the leader. You are unusual for a human. Your resistance is admirable, yet your spirit is open. Jack shot the leader a skeptical look. Resistance? Buddy, I'm just trying not to get eaten by slime. Your spirit-opening business is more than I bargained for. The Zendarii leader's smile, if you could call it that, widened. This is the beginning of your true connection. Your people are so bound to the physical world. You cannot fathom the boundlessness of what lies beyond. Jack felt a tug in his chest, the alien's words landing in his mind with a strange sort of resonance. He was caught off guard by it, and though it made him nervous, he couldn't ignore the oddly comforting sensation that followed. He shook his head as though trying to clear the fog from his mind. All right, Zen spiritual talk aside, are we there yet? We are close, the leader said with a slow, deliberate nod. You must accept the essence of the union. Trust your own thoughts. Accept your place in this vast connection. Jack thought about it for a moment. He wasn't sure what accepting a cosmic union meant, but the longer he stayed in the strange embrace of the slime, the more he began to feel like he was aligning with something. Something greater than himself. And that was when it happened. The feeling exploded inside his mind, like a floodgate opening, and suddenly Jack felt everything. A connection he hadn't expected, a swirl of colors and sensations that went far beyond the physical. He could feel the vastness of the universe in his bones, like he was a part of it. The Zendarii were no longer just aliens to him. They were the conduit to something bigger, something that transcended the space between their species. It was overwhelming, and yet, comforting. Jack closed his eyes and took a slow, steadying breath. Okay, I'm feeling it, he murmured. He wasn't sure what was happening, but this time, the word a cleansing didn't seem so terrifying. He didn't know how to explain it, but it was as if his very consciousness was expanding beyond the room, stretching to the farthest reaches of space. It was almost like being embraced by the universe itself. "Tell me what this means," Jack said quietly, his voice filled with awe. "What am I feeling?" The leader of the Zendarii gave him a sharp glance. "You are connecting with the essence of the Union. You have transcended the limitations of your species."
"Yeah."
"Okay," Jack said, his voice shaking. "I get that part. But what do I do with it now? I mean, this whole soul bonding thing is great, but can we get practical? I'm just a guy trying to get off this planet with all my organs intact." The leader's eyes flashed, and Jack suddenly felt the connection intensify. His thoughts seemed to sync with the alien's presence. "You will become a part of something much greater," the leader said, his voice deep and soothing. "But first, you must understand. To be a part of the Union means giving up everything. Your fears. Your flaws. Your need to control your destiny." Jack's throat tightened, and he almost choked on the words. "Great. And what do I get in return? A badge that says, I survived the cosmic cleansing? For us to say. It is for you to understand." Jack paused. He wasn't sure how much more of this he could take. But in reality, it felt terrifying. He didn't want to give up control, didn't want to lose his sense of self. The idea of merging with something so much bigger than him felt wrong. What if, in this vast cosmic web, there was no longer a place for him? The slime was still there, though, and its heat was a constant reminder of the bond between him and the Zendarii. They were pushing him to give in. To accept something that could change everything about who he was. Jack wasn't sure if he was ready for that. But in this strange moment, in this mind-bending process, he realized something. Maybe he didn't have to understand it all. Maybe the real lesson was about letting go, about trusting the process, just like the universe trusted him to be part of it. "I'm ready," Jack whispered to himself, even if he wasn't entirely sure what ready meant. But at that moment, he felt the weight of the unknown, and it didn't seem as scary as it. Jack's mind was racing with a dizzying mix of sensations, some of which he couldn't quite process. The sense of peace was still there, but it was competing with an undercurrent of confusion. He felt like his mind was stretched out across galaxies, and yet, there was still a part of him, some stubborn, very human part, that wanted to hold on to what was familiar. The ground beneath his feet, the ship he was supposed to be flying, the rules of reality he'd grown up with. These things grounded him, even as the Zendarii pushed him to let go. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. The overwhelming cosmic feeling seemed to pulse around him, pulling at the edges of his consciousness. The slime had settled, no longer constricting, but still present, a gentle reminder of his new state. His body felt light, almost weightless, but it was his mind that felt truly unmoored. All right, Jack muttered, trying to keep it together. "I can do this. It's all good. It's just soul expansion and telepathic bonding, right?" But the longer the silence stretched, the more Jack's nerves started to fray. He opened his eyes to find the Zendarii staring at him with expressions of calm expectancy. They were waiting for something, but Jack had no idea what. If he were being honest, he didn't know how much longer he could stay in this bonding state. The weight of the unspoken expectations was pressing down on him. "Listen, I'm all for personal growth," Jack began, trying to break the tension. "But can we maybe skip the cosmic Zen garden part and get to the part where I don't feel like my mind is being fried by an intergalactic toaster?" One of the shamans tilted his head, the glowing patterns on his skin shifting. "You still cling to the idea of control. It is unnecessary here." Jack let out a short laugh, trying to mask his growing unease. "Control, huh?
Yeah.
Well, I'm a human. We like to know what's going on. Call it a survival instinct." The leader of the Zendarii stepped forward, the faintest trace of amusement playing across his alien features. "That is your flaw. You are taught to hold tight, but the Union is about release. We have lived beyond such fears."
"Yeah."
"I get it," Jack said, his voice tinged with sarcasm. Release, surrender, let go, all that feel-good stuff. But let me tell you, letting go of my mind feels like an extreme sport. The Zendarii leader's eyes flickered with something akin to amusement, but his tone remained serious. You are not giving up your identity. You are expanding it. Expanding my identity? Buddy, I'm just trying not to float away into the cosmic void. I didn't sign up for enlightenment, Jack retorted, though a part of him couldn't help but feel curious about the experience. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, sharp jolt of energy that shot through his body. The slime seemed to vibrate in response, as if it was reacting to the sudden surge. Jack gasped, feeling his breath catch in his chest. His senses were overloaded, and he could barely keep up with what was happening. Every nerve in his body seemed to be firing at once. There were flashes of images, alien landscapes, ancient structures, flashes of memories that didn't belong to him. For a moment, it felt as though he was seeing the entire history of the Zendarii in one overwhelming wave. And then, just as quickly, it all faded. The visions disappeared, and Jack was left feeling oddly hollow. His chest felt tight, as though a part of him had just been ripped away. What was that? He asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. The Zendarii leader observed him carefully. That was the union in its purest form. The essence of our people. You have seen what we have seen, felt what we have felt. You are not just an outsider anymore. You are part of us. Jack's heart was pounding. The intensity of the experience had left him breathless. It wasn't painful, but it was disorienting, like he had just witnessed something that his mind couldn't fully comprehend. That was insane, Jack muttered, still trying to regain his bearings. We warned you, the shaman said with a slight tilt of his head, as if Jack's response was both expected and unsurprising. The process of becoming is not without its trials. But you are strong. You have survived. Jack rubbed his temples. Survived? Buddy, I don't know if I survived, but I definitely feel like I just got hit by a truck made of thoughts and colors. He wasn't sure if he was supposed to be grateful or traumatized by the experience. Part of him just wanted to lie down and let it all sink in. He felt altered in a way he couldn't fully explain. It was as though he was no longer just Jack the human. He was something more. Something connected. Do you understand now? The Zendarii leader asked, his voice almost gentle. I don't know, Jack replied honestly. I think I'm still processing. But I get the idea. This union, it's not just about your culture, it's about sharing something, right? Something bigger than us all. The leader nodded. Exactly. But it is more than just knowledge. It is a bond. A sacrifice. You give up your old way of thinking to embrace something more vast. And in return, you gain insight into the cosmos. Jack let out a long sigh. Insight into the cosmos, huh? I'll admit, that's a little tempting. But let's be real here, if I'm going to sign up for cosmic enlightenment, I better get some practical skills. Like, maybe how to fix my ship. Or, I don't know, a manual on intergalactic diplomacy? The Zendarii leader's expression remained unchanged, but the corners of his mouth quirked up in what could only be interpreted as amusement. We cannot offer you a manual, human. But you now carry the potential to understand things far beyond your comprehension. That is the gift of the union. Jack looked down at himself, his body still encased in the warm, soothing slime. It was hard to argue with the sense of calm it brought him. I guess that's one way to get me out of my head. Your thoughts are important, the leader said softly. But they are also the things that limit you. The union is a reminder that you are part of something much larger. If you can let go of those limitations, you will see things for what they truly are. Jack closed his eyes for a moment, trying to absorb it all. The silence between them stretched out again. He wasn't sure if he was meant to say something profound or if this was all just a cosmic joke. But he wasn't ready for the grand philosophical speech just yet. All he could do was nod. I'll think about it, Jack said finally, his voice quiet. The Zendarii leader seemed satisfied with this response. You have much to learn, human. But you are on the right path. As the ritual continued, Jack's mind wandered, still processing everything. He wasn't sure if he was ready to embrace this new union, but for the first time since he'd arrived, he didn't feel so alone in the vastness of space. Whatever happened next, he realized that his journey was just beginning.